Hello everyone, this is part 15 of What If Naruto Was Like the Sage of Six Paths, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Matsumoto stared at Naruto in horror before his gaze drifted back to the creature, still collapsed over on the other end of the room, a crater in the wall marking where it impacted. Naruto was about to walk forward and finish the creature when Matsumoto ran out in front of him, arms spread out wide as if blocking the blonde's way. What are you doing, Matsumoto? Didn't you see what that thing did to those scientists? We need to do something before it's too late. The graying man just shook his head firmly, his knees shaking slightly from seeing his co-worker's as well as the power Naruto had displayed. Why you can't? Some steel seemed to return to the man's eyes as he straightened up, his stance growing more rigid. Even so, Naruto could tell that while he may have received enough training in chakra to summon, the man had no experience in taijutsu. It's my life's work. Everything I've ever done has been for this. If you destroy it, my life will have been a waste. We need to simply contain it, not K it. Behind him the maggot-esque creature stirred, almost languidly getting back up using its many tentacles as supports. Move aside, Matsumoto. Now. The man stood firm though, even as the creature looked around, its insectoid compound eyes focusing on the balding man. Naruto made to use his shakuju to incapacitate the scientist for now, only to realize it wasn't in his hand. With some shock he realized that it must still be in Honoka's room, he never took it with him. In his moment of hesitation one of the creature's tentacles lashed forward, intent on snaring Matsumoto, no doubt so he could join his co-workers. Banshu Tenon. Just before it could snag the man he was pulled forward by some invisible force, the tentacle closing on nothing but air. Naruto quickly caught the man, pushing him to one side before they could both be crushed as yet another tendril down where they had been moments before. The creature let out a loud and high-pitched shriek at its targets getting away, its large eyes glaring intently at the blonde. Shinra Tensei. Naruto raised both hands this time, wanting to make sure the creature didn't get back up from this hit. However, even as the invisible wave of gravitational forces into the beast, its eyes briefly began to glow an ominous red. Naruto could only blink in surprise when the creature didn't even budge from its position. He watched as the chakra was merely absorbed by the beast instead of impacting with it like it should have. Well, that's not good. He dived out of the way again as another of the creature's tentacles tried to crush him mercilessly. He rolled to the side, near where Matsumoto was now propping himself up against a desk, panting heavily. That won't work. The creature was designed to absorb chakra from ninjutsu. Naruto glared at the man, grimacing to himself. That was a lot like his preta-path and would certainly make things difficult, especially without his shakuju. Is there anything else you can tell me about it that will allow me to defeat it? The graying man just looked up at him hopelessly, obviously having an internal struggle on whether or not to help Naruto. On one hand, the chances of them making it out of here alive were growing increasingly slim. On the other hand, he couldn't bear to see his life's work be destroyed only minutes after he had finished it. You can't destroy it, please. By now the man just sounded desperate, making Naruto turn away in disgust. He couldn't stand that this man would allow innocent people to rest just to save an experiment. Unfortunately, any more thoughts were interrupted by Naruto having to jump out of the way of another attack. Damn. I need to do something about those tentacles. He sprinted across the room, ducking and weaved between various gray tendrils the creature kept sending after him, obviously identifying him as the main threat. However, before Naruto could come up with a plan, he saw a green blur race past. A moment later the creature let out a deafening shriek as one of its many tentacles suddenly fell from its body, green liquid spurting from the wound. Need help. Fu landed next to him a second later, two long swords made of water held in each hand as she glared at the creature. Naruto merely smiled at her as he began to think about what he could do. If I can hold it still, do you think you could deal with the tentacles? Fu narrowed her eyes at the creature, which was now staring at her intently with red eyes. She nodded once, settling into her stance as she avoided a barrage of crushing attacks from the beast, away at its when she could. Naruto just watched her before nodding and channeling his chakra quickly, hoping to deal with the creature's many limbs all at once. Cuccios. When the smoke cleared, the creature looked around, staring at the new arrival with hunger. Naruto ignored that as he jumped up atop the enormous octopus he had summoned, the Rinnegan eyes it had telling him it was not a real summon. From the corner of the room, Matsumoto stared up at the enormous invertebrate with awe. He had never heard of an octopus contract. Get ready, Fu. Without so much as a word, the octopus moved forward with surprising speed for a creature so far out of its element. A moment later, the beast suddenly found all its tentacles ensnared by the limbs of Naruto's octopus, the suction cups keeping a very tight grip. Knowing that was her signal, Fu dashed forward, nothing more than a blur to most in the room. In seconds it appeared to be over. Fu skidded to a stop, her water sea swords falling uselessly to the ground as the jutsu ended. When he looked back, there was a moment of pause before the creature once more let out a terrible shriek of pain. However, before anybody could capitalize on the creature's sudden disadvantage, a new tentacle that had been hidden behind its body suddenly whipped out, faster than the others. In only mere moments it had wrapped around the body of the octopus and slowly began to reel the giant cephalopod towards it. Naruto had to jump back as his summon was immediately absorbed into the beast, as if it had never been there in the first place. I told you, nothing will work against it. Naruto had landed near to where Matsumoto was cowering behind a desk on the far side of the lab from the creature. It has the ability to absorb other summons to expand its abilities and grow stronger. Naruto simply stared at the man in a mixture of frustration and disbelief. He wondered what had possessed him to make a creature this difficult to control. Naruto. The blonde swiveled on one foot to see an enormous tentacle, thicker than the ones before, about to rest down on his body. Thinking on the fly, he suddenly blasted away into the air, one arm looped around the doctor's waist, as he used a quick Shinra Tensei to get him away. Milliseconds later, the clean white tiles were into shards as the thick limb crashed down on the floor, leaving a long and deep imprint. When the blonde looked at the beast, it had regrown all of its tentacles, except they were longer and thicker now, each having a single row of suction cups running their length. He set Matsumoto down on one of the higher catwalks, hoping the man would be safe here, although the chances were looking increasingly grim. Ninjutsu and his techniques using chakra were useless. His summons only made the beast stronger, and if he got close enough to use taijutsu, he would most likely get absorbed. He had no intention of finding out which of their abilities to absorb chakra was stronger. Damn it. How do I beat this thing? He looked to Matsumoto again, but the man was no use. He was just staring down at the maggot-like beast with wide eyes, shivering occasionally. Before he could think of anything, though, his eyes widened in surprise. Below them, Honoka had run forward, already flashing through a long chain of hand seals. When she got close enough, she crouched down, her hands onto the floor as an enormous sealing matrix spread out. Honoka, what are you doing? The girl just ignored Naruto as the long lengths of ink-black sealing symbols began to peel off of the floor, shooting out like chains. The beast struggled beneath the bright lines of light but slowly began to be pushed to the floor. However, its eyes once again flashed that ominous red. The change was obvious as Honoka grunted from the exertion, sweat beginning to gather on her brow. Please, do something quickly. I can't hold it for very long. The redhead's cry broke him from his surprised stupor as he vaulted the catwalk, dashing across the ground as a long black chakra rod slid from his sleeve. He wasn't sure if this would work, but he didn't want to give up an opportunity like this. Apparently Fu had shared his thoughts as she too sprinted towards the beast, water sea blades once again extended from her hands. They moved past one another before moving towards their targets, Fu jumping up into the air. Naruto ran to the nearest tentacle, his chakra rod down into the tip, driving both it and the limb into the floor. As soon as he did, he rolled over the tendril, another chakra rod already slipping from his other sleeve. As soon as he reached the next one, Hao repeated the process, driving the sturdy rod straight into the beast's and ignoring its pained cries. As a monk, he hated seeing any creature, even one created for the sole purpose of hurt in any way. However, he would never allow this thing to escape uncontrolled. Takagaku Ryu, Kakuchu. As Fu descended from her jump, the two swords in her hands suddenly grew outwards, extending past the previous limits. With a cry, the mint-haired girl brought him down, both into the creature's head all the way up to her hands. She stood there on the beast's bulbous head for a moment, panting slightly as she maintained the chakra-intensive technique for a moment longer, making sure it the creature. However, her orange eyes suddenly widened as she felt her chakra ebbing away, flowing out through her swords and into the beast. At the same moment she also felt her feet start to sink. Naruto. The blonde looked up before he could impale the last of the tentacles, seeing Fu slowly being absorbed into the creature. He was about to throw his hand up to draw her back, but the beast used that moment to s him with its last remaining free limb, sending him flying across the room. He twisted his body before it could impact painfully with a wall, landing feet first so he could flip back down onto the ground safely. Fu no. Naruto would have attempted to save the girl, but his Banshu tenon wasn't that accurate from this distance. Before he could sprint over there to help her though, the same golden tendrils of light suddenly broke away from the creature, freeing it, but at the same time wrapping around just Fu. In a few seconds she was free of the beast as Honoka drew her back, leaving the green-haired girl panting on the floor beside the redhead, her eyes widened in fear. Naruto breathed a sigh of relief before he too opened his eyes in shock. A shadow began to descend on the two girls as the beast brought a tentacle down in a sweeping motion to crush them both. However, before it could, they suddenly flew backwards, as if yanked back by invisible strings tied around their waists, both crashing into Naruto's opened arms. They lay there on the floor for a moment, Fu and Honoka taking small breathers while Naruto was trapped due to their bee lying on his arms. Fu, Honoka. The two girls looked up at his face for a moment before blushing and looking away, quickly scrabbling back to their feet. Naruto got up slightly more slowly, keeping an eye on the beast as it wreathed on the floor. He was surprised the thing wasn't but then again it had already proved how resilient it was. No doubt it had absorbed a lot of the chakra from Fu's water blades before they could do the damage intended. How do we get rid of this thing? Even as the blonde watched, the beast began using its one free tentacle to slowly draw out each chakra rod from its limbs, shrieking in pain with each one it removed from its F. Suddenly they all saw Matsumoto appear from the catwalks, walking slowly towards the beast, Honoka's eyes widening in horror. Matsumoto-sensei, what are you doing? The older man ignored her though, slowly walking towards the beast with his arms opened wide. The creature kept one eye on the man, its free tentacles swaying slowly as it continued to remove the rods from the rest. Yes, that's right. You recognize me, don't you? It's me, your creator, your father. The beast continued to gaze at the man, unmoving for the moment as Naruto, Fu, Honoka, and Shizuku could only watch on, wondering what would happen. Listen to me. You should stand down and return to your tank, that's an order. The beast's head edged to the side slowly before its gaze drifted across to the metal tank in the center of the room. That's right, listen to my orders as your creator. Slowly the beast's limbs rose into the air, as if in compliance, eliciting a large grin from the aging scientist. Yes, that's Rigar. Everybody's eyes widened as Matsumoto suddenly doubled over, spitting up bee from his mouth as he looked down with a shaky head. He grasped it between his shivering hands before looking up at the creature, his eyes widened in shock that never left his face as he slumped over. Before anybody else could react, his limp body was raised into the air before swiftly being absorbed into the creature. No. Matsumoto-sensei. Honoka was the first to break out of the shocked silence that had enveloped the room, running forward only to be grabbed from behind by Naruto and pulled back. Just in time too, as not a second later one of the tentacles down in front of them, crushing the tiles in the spot Honoka was just in. No. Let me go. Matsumoto-sensei. She struggled against the blonde's firm grip, unable to break away as Naruto suddenly jumped back again, avoiding another attack aimed at the two of them. Honoka, stop it. He landed back down on one of the upper catwalks, closer to the entrance of the facility, holding Honoka back as she struggled against his grip. Let me go, Naruto. I have to stop it. Naruto just kept holding her down, passively using his Preta path to weaken her slightly until she stopped struggling. Below them the creature thrashed about, obviously displeased it had lost its target. In the meantime Fu had recovered, dashing back in with her water blades in order to sever the beast's tentacles again. Honoka, stop, there's nothing you can do, it will just absorb your seals. Finally the red-haired girl dropped, resisting, falling slack in Naruto's arms as she quietly sobbed. But I have to keep fighting. What about Matsumoto-sensei? She sobbed again, louder this time as she latched onto one of Naruto's arms, pressing it against her as tears trickled down her cheeks. Naruto just patted her on the back, knowing what the loss of a loved one felt like as he did his best to comfort her and keep an eye on the creature. You don't have to fight anymore, Honoka, leave it to us. Suddenly the girl bit back her tears, standing up before Naruto could grab her. No, I can't just sit here while that thing runs loose. I need to fight because it's what I believe is right. Before Naruto could stop her, she dived over the edge of the catwalk, rolling to her feet when she hit the floor. She immediately crouched down, speeding through hand seals as fast as she dared, different ones this time. When she s her hands down that time, another sealing matrix spread out. However, when the symbols peeled from the floor, they were a deep red, almost as if they were set aflame. As Fu darted and weaved between the various tentacles, S and C any exposed F she could while keeping out of the beast's reach, Honoka's seals rushed forward. However, instead of suppressing the beast like before, the new seals seemingly seared straight into the creature's F, leaving deep black marks on its skin. Like before, the beast shrieked in pain, glaring at the two girls as its eyes glowed red in anger as it thrashed about. However, like before, it eventually became too much. The creature just had too many limbs, and in the end it simply forced them back or threatened to crush them. Fu panted from her position, the water blade in her hand finally bursting back into its harmless element. She suddenly straightened up, her fists clenched in anger as an oppressive aura suddenly spread out across the room. Everybody looked to the girl as virulent red chakra gradually spread across her body like a cloak, two crisp, insectoid wings rising from her lower back out of the corrosive shroud. Faster than most could see, she darted forward, fist dead back as she approached the beast. She ducked underneath one of its tentacles, intent on swatting her away like a fly. Although flew past, it would be more accurate. Her vibrant chakra wings beat incredibly quickly, creating a slightly hum as she skimmed across the floor. Finally she reached the beast, her fist right into one of its eyes with a sickening squelch. Time seemed to slow a little as he fist sunk into the creature's vulnerable eye, the beast crying out in agonizing pain, raising a tentacle to strike her. However, Fu moved out of the way, allowing the beast to s itself over the head with its own limb. However, in its anger it lashed out with all of its tentacles at once, now furiously mad at the floating Fu. The girl was fast, but not enough to avoid all of the tendrils at once. One long tentacle wrapped around her body at the waist, squeezing her tightly. She tried to s her fist into it, hoping to get the beast to let her go, but it had the opposite effect, crushing her even tighter as it coiled. She grunted in pain as she felt her bones begin to creak, her features twisting into a grimace. Suddenly she gasped as the corrosive chakra around her body slowly began to ebb away, sinking into the beast's tentacle as its remaining eye glowed. As the vile but protective shroud began to dissipate, the beast squeezed even harder, slowly drawing the girl towards its body. However, before it could begin to absorb her, everybody suddenly saw a streak of black fly across the room. With another sickening cry, the creature dropped Fu roughly to the ground, its tentacle waving madly in the air, allowing everybody to see the long black rod impaled all the way through. Banshu Tenon. A moment later and Fu was safely in Naruto's arms, being gently laid on the floor to one side. They had a brief moment of respite as the beast thrashed about, mourning the loss of its eye and trying to lessen the pain in its limbs that were healing at an astonishing rate, no doubt thanks to the enormous amount of chakra it absorbed from Fu. Naruto just frowned, struggling to come up with a way of defeating a creature that could shrug off most attacks. Damn it, chakra-based attacks don't work, we can't get close to it, Biju chakra is useless and anything I summon just. Suddenly an idea struck Naruto, his eyes widening in surprise at not thinking of it sooner. He suddenly turned around, dashing away from the creature and towards the exit of the facility. However, before he could get far, Fu grabbed his hand, halting him for a moment as she looked up to him. What are you doing? Naruto just gave her a small smile, surprising the girl given the serious situation they were in. It's a summoning animal, right? Fu just nodded in confusion as Naruto grinned and sped off again, sprinting as fast as he could towards the exit of the facility. He raced past Shizuku and Honoka, the two girls giving him matching looks of confusion that he ignored. Finally he reached the outside, skidding to a stop at the edge of the ledge that dropped down into the boiling lake of lava beneath them. The blonde stopped, turning back to look into the lab where he could see the red eyes of the beast staring straight back at him. He merely answered with a grim smile. Kuchios. He s his hand down into the ground, right at the edge of the cliff so that the sealing matrix actually spread out into thin air. He leapt back as the area erupted in a cloud of smoke, only to clear and reveal the beast itself. Its red compound eyes widened slightly as it suddenly found itself outside, balanced precariously over the ledge. It tried to s one of its tentacles down on the ground as an anchor, but Naruto saw what it was doing. Oh no you don't. The blonde leapt forward, a chakra rod straight into the tentacle before it could get a proper grip. The creature shrieked in pain as it let go, its remaining eye widening as it suddenly fell backwards, unable to balance any longer. Naruto didn't walk forward to look down, he didn't want to see what was happening. The horrifying cries of pain and anguish were bad enough to listen to as the beast slowly melted to death in the molten rock. He nearly jumped when he felt a hand on his shoulder. He looked around to see Honoka staring towards the ledge. Are you okay? Honoka just nodded sadly, dried tears staining her face as she sniffed back more. Naruto just gave her a weak smile before patting her on the shoulder and walking past to see if Fu and Shizuku were okay. The four young preteens were back in Honoka's room, Naruto thankfully reunited with his shakuju. He had been surprised to find that Honoka had actually carried it with her when she found him in the forest, which led him to believe she had a surprising amount of chakra. He briefly wondered if that was an inherent Uzumaki trait, a question Honoka couldn't answer due to her not knowing her parents. Apparently Matsumoto had found her in an outlying village in Mizu in Kuni in an orphanage, taking an interest in her due to her name. He took care of her over time, raising her and training her in any Uzumaki techniques he could find. Naruto discovered that the Uzumaki clan were not only famous for their seals but also incredibly apt in them. Most teenage Uzumaki were able to surpass what passed for a sealing master anywhere else in the elemental nations. It made Naruto wish he had looked at seals more in depth, but at the time he was more interested in finding a way to help Sora, and sealing would have taken too long to learn, and that was gambling on whether or not he was a real Uzumaki. Despite all of Honoka's insistence that she could somehow feel that he was family, Naruto could never quite remove that nagging doubt at the back of his mind, something he may never be able to get over. Now the four were discussing what would happen now the facility was shut down. They had been unable to find the two remaining scientists who had run off when the creature first started absorbing their co-workers. Honoka didn't really know any of them too well, only having proper contact with Matsumoto, but she worried for them anyway. The forest was now a dangerous place with all the summons running about without any contract holders to direct them. This point brought Naruto onto something that had been bothering the blonde for a while now. Honoka, you've been researching summons for a while now, right? The redhead nodded from her position sitting cross-legged on her bed. Shizuku was in a chair on the other end of the room while Naruto was leaning against the girl's desk, shakuju safely in hand. Fu was more content to simply lean up against the wall, quite close to the door in case they had to leave quickly. It was a remnant of her conditioning in Taki she hadn't been able to break. Do you have any idea why I was unable to summon Shizuku when she was being taken away by the giant eagle? The red-haired Uzumaki blinked before looking up thoughtfully, the question interesting her due to her inherited interest with all things to do with summoning she had gained from Matsumoto. I'm not sure, I would have to know more about your ability. Naruto just nodded, giving the girl a rundown of what he could do and had done with his animal path up until then. As he continued to explain, the awed and fascinated look on Honoka's face only grew. At one point she rushed over to her desk and grabbed a notebook, quickly scribbling down what Naruto was saying. When he was done, the girl simply stared at her notes in thought for a while, going over everything in her head. Well, I can only give you a hypothesis until I could get more data, but the only reason I could see would be because of Matsumoto-sensei. The girl's voice was quiet at the end as her head tilted down mournfully. Naruto thought she somehow blamed herself for her mentor and father figure's deaths. However, when she looked up and saw all of the confused faces, she cleared her tea and wiped away the tears percolating at the edge of her vision. I think because Matsumoto-sensei still held a viable contract with the Eagles, you were unable to summon them, and by extension anything connected to them at the time. It must mean that you are unable to summon animals with a pre-existing contract with humans. Naruto frowned at that. The logic was sound after all and it was a good explanation, but there was a problem. But I can summon the chameleons, they're an actual summon and they've had a contract with humans before. They told me so. It was Honoka's turn to frown at the new information as she returned to her notes, skimming over them briefly. Are their summoners still alive? Naruto blinked at the question before shaking his head slowly, making Honoka smirk. If there was anything she enjoyed, it was confirming a hypothesis like any good scientist. When a summoner something happens with the contract. Their name remains where they signed it, but it fades slightly, freeing the animals from that summoner, unless they were already called upon before the deaths. So if the animal has no living summoner, then you are able to call upon them with your ability. If they do, you cannot. Naruto just looked at the redhead, impressed by how quickly she had gone through all that. Matsumoto-sensei may have been able to tell you more, he was the expert after all. She looked down again, obviously saddened and barely holding back her tears. He would have loved the chance to talk to you, you could have revealed so much about summoning. At that she finally broke down, sobbing quietly to herself on the bed with her hands bunched up into fists. She didn't even look up when Naruto walked over, placing a comforting arm around her shoulders. A day later and the group were standing on a beach on the west side of the island, the sea breeze making their hair and clothes flutter about. The trio was saying the goodbyes to Honoka, who was tearing up slightly. Shizuku too was saddened. In the time they had spent together, the two girls had become fast friends with a lot to talk about. But in the end they had to go their separate ways, much to their mutual displeasure. Are you sure you don't want to come with us? There's always room for one more in the group. Honoka just gave the blonde a sad smile as she moved forward and captured him in a hug. Sorry, but this is something I have to do. Matsumoto-sensei always promised that one day he would take me to the ruins of Uzushio. I have to make sure that I see that promise is kept. Are you sure you don't want to come with me? Your family after all. Naruto stepped away from the hug, looking at the shorter girl with melancholy in his eyes. Honoka, we've already talked about this. You know he was see off as the girl placed a finger against his lips, a light smile running across her features. No matter what you say, Naruto, you're family to me. B does not make a family, bonds do. She giggled into her hand as she stepped back, waving to the two other girls who waved back, one with more enthusiasm than the other. Naruto thought it might actually be for the best she didn't join the group. For some reason Fu didn't get along all that well with the red-haired Uzumaki. So I guess I'll see you around, Itoko. She gave him a beaming grin that Naruto couldn't help but return with a small smile of his own. Yeah, in any case I want to thank you. Honoka just blinked at that, looking up at the blonde in confusion. Thank me. Naruto just nodded as his smile grew slightly. He looked away for a moment as if remembering a fond memory. You reminded me of something my own sensei once taught me, something I had been ignoring until now. He looked back to the redhead, pulling her into another brief hug, this time annoying both Shizuku and Fu, although the former was still uncertain as to why. He told me that being a pacifist is not about avoiding all conflict, but about knowing how to choose your fights. He pulled away, leaving the Uzumaki with a slight red hue to her cheeks. You reminded me of that, so thank you. He suddenly moved back, molding his chakra as he walked before his hand down. Kuchios. When the smoke cleared, Honoka recognized the animal as the same strange bird she had knocked Naruto and Fu off when they had arrived at the island. Wow, I don't think I'll ever get tired of seeing you do that. Naruto just grinned as he hopped up onto the bird, Fu and Shizuku quickly following him, despite the Violet's slight hesitation. As they took off, the bird's strong wings beating downwards to lift them into their air, Honoka waved the group off, however she couldn't help but call to them one more time. What are you going to do now? She saw Naruto's grin as he waved to her even from that distance. What else? I'm going to choose a fight. The redhead just smiled as the group slowly flew off into the distance. When they were finally out of sight, she turned, scratching her head once. Where did they leave the boats again? In a lifeless area of Mizu no Kuni, surrounded by destroyed trees and burnt-out foliage, the mists were particularly thick. The sun was setting over the horizon, casting an eerie orange glow through the dense fog. The air was bitingly cold, evidenced by the layer of frost coating everything. It was always like this in March for the residents of Mizu no Kuni, and most had gotten used to it. Of course, that didn't make the complaints of one Kirigakure shinobi any quieter as he and his companion made the normal routes through the deforested area surrounding their base. I mean seriously, do you think it would cost them that much to spring for some warmer flak jackets? The man was fairly young, barely out of his teens, with messy light blue hair falling about the sides of his face, only kept out of his eyes by his headband. He wore the standard Kiri uniform complete with the dark navy flak jacket with protruding shoulder guards. Shut it. His companion, a much older and more grizzled man with a scar running across his face diagonally, was in a much less talkative mood. But then again, I guess some warm scarves or something might do as well, just something to keep the frost out, you know. The younger man walked out in front, his hands up behind his head as he glanced about, only using the minimum awareness for his surroundings. They had made this route countless times before and had never seen hide nor hair of any rebels. They were far too deep in their own territory. Shut it. The younger man simply ignored his companion. The man never said much other than to try and get him to be quiet, and not in particularly nice ways. Today was a good day. He hadn't been threatened him yet, so he planned on enjoying it while it lasted. You'd think if Mizuki-sama wanted us at our best to beat those bloodline freaks, he would at least want us to stay warm, right? The man walked on a few more paces before blinking in surprise. It was rare for his fellow shinobi to simply ignore his inane ramblings. He put his arms down at his side as he turned, frowning slightly at the change from the norm. However, he was instantly on alert when he saw the man was nowhere in sight, the mist seeming slightly stronger than normal. Hey Karu. Slowly he began to reach for his kunai pouch, eyes darting about to spot anything in the all too oppressive mists. He managed to notice that it was oddly soft, like sand, before he felt something tap his forehead and his world went dark. Well, that was surprisingly easy. Naruto wiped a stray bang out of his face as he replaced his shakuju safely on his back. In the few months since the incident on the summoning island, he had allowed it to grow out quite a bit. He hadn't exactly had time to get it see. His spiky ponytail was beginning to reach his shoulder blades and the bangs around his face had begun falling over his headband in a rather irritating way. Shizuku had told him it made him appear more handsome, but Naruto merely thought it was distracting. Did you expect anything else? A green blur dropped down beside him, revealing itself to be Fu. Like him, her hair had also grown out, now touching her shoulders. Both had rather surprising growth spurts recently, now standing at 5'2" and 5'1" respectively. The most noticeable change though was Fu no longer wore her bright white outfit, instead opting for darker navy and grey tones to better camouflage with the mists. I suppose not. How do you think Shizuku and Chojuro are doing with theirs? Fu just raised an eyebrow at the monk, to which he just waved her off with a slightly irritated expression. Don't be like that, I'm allowed to worry about her, okay? To be honest, he had no real reason to be worried about Shizuku. Chojuro was strong by his own rights, but that wasn't to say the Violette couldn't take care of herself. The last few months had certainly been interesting for the trio. After leaving Honoka, they had sought out the rebels. It hadn't been hard. Thanks to Naruto's near-perfect memory, he had been able to spot more than a few of their camp positions with that single glance into their command tent. It had taken a few tries due to them moving about, but eventually they had tracked a group down. They of course were suspicious at first, as they had a right to be, but that was soon sorted out. Look, we don't mean you any harm, we merely wish to offer our help. The tall rebel shinobi simply looked down at the shorter blonde. A guarded eye drifting to his two female companions stood behind him. Aha, and I should believe you're not spies, why? How was it you were able to find our camp? That's not exactly something that makes me drop my guard. Naruto looked around, noticing they were drawing the attention of a few more shinobi around them. I told you, Nezumiro told me how to find you guys if I ever decided to help. It was a lie, but he thought the alternative sounded far more suspicious and was likely to end up with them in custody. How do you know the name of Mei-sama's cousin? Naruto just sighed, resisting the urge to rest his head in his palm. He knew these people had a right to be wary in order to preserve their secrecy, but this was becoming ridiculous, bordering on paranoid. Look, I said, suddenly a shout see through any other conversation going on as everybody turned to look at the speeding orange blur that many of the rebels recognized. Naruto-kun. The blonde only had time to widen his eyes before being tackled to the ground in an undignified heap. If he didn't know for sure she was standing right behind him, he would have sworn it was Shizuku. However, when he looked up, he was staring straight into a pair of sparkling emerald eyes, framed by burnt orange hair. Nezumiro. Naruto smiled fondly at the memory. During their time helping the rebellion, Nezumiro had become a good friend. Among the bleak realities of war and the even drearier climate of Mizu no Kuni in winter, she was like a perpetual ray of light. There was literally nothing that ever kept her down for long. Not even her injury that had her only doing light exercise until recently. Even now she wasn't allowed to go out on any missions until she was back to her old self again, but that didn't stop her from getting the occasional spar out of Naruto or Fu, and sometimes even Shizuku. That was another big surprise. Shizuku had finally mastered the second stage of the water chakra exercises. After that she had begun to soak up water ninjutsu like a sponge. All the rebels who taught her were just astounded by the rate she picked them up. Not only that, but she could use them even when there wasn't any nearby source of water, drawing the moisture straight from the air. The mists helped, but even so some of the best water specialists in the rebellion couldn't do that. Apparently it was comparable to Kisame Hoshigaki or the Nadaime Hokage. Either way she had become quite the combatant but had never lost her innocent personality. Even now, after months of helping the rebels, she was loath to hurt people, taking on Naruto's mantra of suppression as opposed to K. Most of the time she would use a special technique she had developed in order to painlessly suffocate her target, knocking him out. She had nearly broken down crying the first time she used it outside of a spa, but luckily Naruto was there to calm her down. He still remembered the shock he got when they had first discovered her latent abilities. Shizuku stood firm at the center of a training ground, her hands up in the taijutsu stance Naruto had been teaching her. With the discovery of her amazing water affinity, Naruto had decided to try and teach her one of his styles in the hopes that she could use it. Technically his Mizu no Mai should be useless to anybody other than him due to it requiring his Preta Path ability. However, Naruto didn't want Shizuku to get hurt, and it was his second most evasive style behind the K's no Mai, but she lacked the training in wind-natured chakra for that. So you know what to do, right? The Violette nodded to the young monk, taking a deep breath as her eyes focused. Naruto gave her a moment to prepare before rushing in, starting off with a standard jab to her stomach. He was only going at half his regular speed so that the girl had a chance to warm up to the stances in an actual combat situation as opposed to simply running through the kata. To his satisfaction, Shizuku skillfully swerved to one side, rolling with the motion until they were back to back. Before he could lash out with his other hand, she dropped down, pushing off with her hands to skid between his parted legs. At the same time she had already begun to turn, hoping to remove Naruto's base by sliding his legs out from under him. The blonde jumped up in time to avoid it but was forced back again as Shizuku completed the motion by thrusting up, keeping her hands on the ground to come up spinning with her legs in a perfect splits. Naruto smiled as he leant back underneath the kicks. He had added a few more offensive moves to her kata to make up for the lack of his ability. That's good, Shizuku. The Violette preened under the praise as she landed back on her feet, throwing her head back to let her hair fall into place behind her. Like Fu, she had undergone a change of wardrobe, but not as drastic. She had altered the colors of her kimono top and hakama to light blue and purple respectively to better blend in with the surroundings. At the same time it had the effect of making her opponents underestimate her, while in fact the clothes gave her a surprising range of movement. Try it again, this time with what we've been practicing. The girl nodded firmly as they rushed back together, meeting in what onlookers might have mistaken for some kind of high-speed dance. They twisted around one another in increasingly complex maneuvers in order to try and pin or bring down the other. Of course Naruto wasn't going full out, but that wasn't the purpose of the training. Naruto had thought Shizuku might be able to compensate for her lack of his Preta Path by circulating water chakra throughout her body. It had been an idea he himself had toyed with, but in practice it proved to be too difficult to simultaneously focus on that, the moves themselves and his chakra absorption technique. He figured Shizuku shouldn't have the same handicap with only two things to focus on. The idea was to use the water chakra flowing through the body in order to increase one's flexibility, sometimes to almost ridiculous degrees. It also acted as a shock absorber, carrying the impacts through the body and dispersing the energy more economically. Naruto smirked as he saw an opening in Shizuku's form. She had overextended on the last move instead of flowing through to the next kata, and he decided to point out the mistake. He turned on one foot, using chakra to increase the friction and turn faster, and intended to give her a light tap on the shoulder. However, his eyes widened when instead, his hand simply passed straight through the girl, her body parting like a liquid around his hand. When they parted again, the two looked at each other in shock. The Kiri ninja who had been watching them out of boredom didn't fare much better. It had taken quite a bit of explaining, but eventually they had discovered that it was a jutsu developed by the Huzuki clan called the hydrification technique. It involved them literally turning their body parts into water, maintained and held in shape by their chakra. The only thing that confused the rebels was the fact that it was only usable by a Huzuki, not only due to their high water affinities but the unique genetic makeup, making it something on the border between clan specialty and Kekkei Genkai. Not only that, but the only remaining Huzuki clan member had disappeared not too long after his brother had a few months beforehand. This finally confirmed it for Naruto and Fu. Later on they had taken Shizuku aside and explained to her what they had found in that base back in Ta no Kuni. At first she was simply disbelieving. After all, few could take the fact they are a genetic clone of an extinct Kirigakure clan member with genes from the Nadaime Hokage spliced in. At least it explained where her absurdly powerful water affinity came from. It had taken a few days, but Naruto had managed to get through to Shizuku again, comforting her as she came to terms with that. The worst blow was probably the fact she had no real parents. She was more of a creation, an experiment than a human being. It had taken a while for Naruto to get that concept out of her head, to convince her that she was just as human as he was. That had been the first night the two spent together, just lying next to one another and enjoying the company. Since then they had slept in the same bed every night aside from the ones where they were on separate missions, but those were rare. At first their responsibilities were mostly guarding various cargo movements as they went between the various camps for resupplies. Naruto was okay with that. Most of the time they went by undisturbed, and the only problems they had come across was the occasional ambush from loyalists. Luckily, due to Naruto's ability to scout ahead with his sand, those were quickly turned on their heads, not expecting the rebels to know about the ambush ahead of time. He had earned quite the reputation amongst the rebels for his refusal to kill anybody, yet still always managing to deal with all his opponents. There was also his unique skills that never failed to catch the enemy off guard. Most useful was his ability to increase the gravity in a specific area, which he was slowly controlling better and better with each passing day. It sometimes allowed him to completely negate fights entirely, something greatly appreciated by the rebels as it saved them valuable supplies and lives. Of course nobody knew where his skills came from. He had yet to tell a soul about his Rinnegan. It wasn't that he didn't trust the rebels. Far from it, he had made more than a few friends amongst the younger shinobi. It was simply the fact he couldn't risk word getting out about a Rinnegan user wandering the elemental nations. It would bring a lot of attention on him and his friends. So far the only people outside of his group that knew were Nezumiro and her Aunt May, due to her letting it slip by accident. One of the reasons Naruto was so cautious to tell anybody else. Thankfully the buxom leader of the rebellion was very understanding of Naruto's situation, at least after she had gotten over her excitement at seeing a legendary doujutsu. Naruto smiled again at the memory of the normally mature and powerful leader acting like a giddy schoolgirl. She understood all too well the feeling of not wanting a bloodline to come to light in fear of how it may affect one's loved ones. In that way all the bloodline clans fighting the Mizukage could relate. It was the very reason they were fighting the injustice in the first place. He also couldn't be certain, but Naruto suspected Ao knew as well. He didn't think May had told anybody else, but he had seen the older man give him curious and penetrating looks on occasion. He was never too far from May's side, and sometimes even when Naruto wasn't in the same room he felt Ao's gaze on him. It was highly disconcerting, but other than that Naruto found the man to be very competent, if not slightly stuck in the past. Although it did make for some amusing situations when May seemingly misheard him. Since then Naruto and his friends had gone on increasingly important missions for the rebels. It was anything from sabotage of buildings to ambushing supply caravans similar to the very ones he had been protecting not long before. Really it was anything in order to cripple or slow down Yagura's forces, mostly guerrilla tactics that would hit hard and fast before leaving without a trace. It was something Naruto had quite the knack for due to his exceptional stealth skills. Many of the rebels were still completely amazed at how easily he could move undetected. It helped he hadn't told anybody about his Boidogakure technique. That led up to here, where he and another group of rebels were slowly surrounding a large facility fairly deep into the loyalist territory, but more importantly, dangerously close to Kirigakure itself. It was one of the largest missions he had been on, involving a hefty chunk of the rebel forces. If this mission went wrong, then they would suffer some serious losses, something Naruto would try to avoid at all costs. He had spent too long fighting alongside the rebels to see them fail when they were just beginning to see a change in the tide of the war. Are we ready to go? The blonde looked up at Fu with a smile. Despite his best attempts, Fu hadn't really cracked from her usual expressionless persona. He had thought being around people would make her loosen up and learn to trust people other than him and Shizuku. It seemed to have the opposite effect. The mint-haired girl hung close to him even more than before. He couldn't tell if he was intimidated by the others or was simply reminded of her time in Taki. I think so. The young monk placed his hand on ground, palm flat against the damp ground. He took a deep breath as he spread his chakra through the soil, converting it slowly into sand that he could use. After around a minute he finally opened his eyes, a small smile briefly playing over his lips. He looked up, noticing that Fu had been conversing with a few insects as well. I count 20 guards outside, 56 prisoners. I can't tell what's happening inside the buildings though. Fu was quiet for a moment before nodded slowly, agreeing with the estimate. Not only had Naruto's Deva Path skills improved over the last few months, but his ability to control sand. Specifically, his ability to sense people's chakra through the sand as long as they were in contact with it. Right now he had a very thin layer spread out across the entire facility. Every time anybody took a step on the ground he knew where they were exactly. It was exceedingly useful for reconnaissance and information gathering, vital aspects of warfare. Ao-san was correct then. Naruto just nodded. Ao had an uncanny ability to scout places out. Nobody even knew how he did it, even though Naruto suspected it had something to do with the eye underneath his patch. When he had asked about it though, the irritable man had simply told him to mind his own business. When he had asked others, they could only tell him he lost it during his time as the head of the Kiri Hunter Nin branch of their Anbu. Are you ready? Fu paused for a moment before nodding once, the two suddenly disappearing in a blur of motion. The Loyalist facility was oddly quiet for such a large compound. Usually there would be the sound of the guards idly chatting or the groans and various pleas of the prisoners, quickly ended by the guards kicking the cages. However, tonight it was almost silent. An odd aura hung in the air that had many of the guards on edge. It was one of those sixth senses you gain from spending too long fighting. Something was going to happen tonight, but nobody knew what. It was officially a prison. In reality though, it was simply a large collection of cages where any captured bloodline holders were kept until they could be safely transported to more secure locations. Numerous chakra-suppressing seals lined the long series of cages, making sure anybody held inside wouldn't even have the strength to stand. The prisoners were grouped together in 4s or 5s, left in whatever clothes they had been captured in, regardless of condition. The Loyalists were indiscriminate about who they captured. Women, children, non-combatants, that didn't matter if they had a Kekkei Genkai or spoke out against the Mizukage. The only noise that broke through the silence was the soft crunch of the guards' sandals against the frosty ground as they made the patrols. Of course none of them noticed as the ground beneath their feet grew ever so slightly softer. It all happened in an instant. The guards never stood a chance as the ground itself suddenly rose up to swallow them all. From the wall of the facility Naruto crouched down, his body cloaked to both eyes and senses alike as he held out his hand. It took a lot of concentration for him to manipulate the sand so finely to capture multiple targets like this. Finally though it was over, all of the guards lay on the ground, cocooned in a layer of tough, chakra-enhanced sand that covered their mouths before they even got a chance to cry out. Moments later multiple blurs appeared within the compound's walls, dashing across to the cages as fast as they could. Those prisoners that were still awake and not on the verge of unconsciousness due to hunger or dehydration were able to spot around 10 Kiri shinobi. Fu, Shizuku, and Chojuro were among them while Naruto stayed in his position, keeping the guards restrained while watching out for reinforcements. They had to be fast. One downside of his ability was that he was unable to deconstruct concrete or other more sturdy building materials into sand. That meant he was unable to see what was going on inside the buildings, no doubt used as barracks for the guards posted at the facility. That was why all the shinobi selected were able to use water ninjutsu to a high degree so they could all silently off the locks on the cages with a bastardized version of Taki's water sea sword that only surrounded the user's hand. Once the prisoners were free they went about quickly handing out food and water, enough so that they would have the energy to make it back behind their own lines. The rebels had made a great effort to push forward in the past few months, and the contested zones had now reached the area around Kirigakure no Sato itself, towards the more southern region of the country. It was no secret that the loyalists were beginning to feel the strain. Yagura had no allies, no backing from the daimyo or any higher power. He only had the powers at his disposal, namely the village itself. While they could produce their own weapons and had a steady supply of food for their forces, they lacked long-term financial stability. With the civil war taking up most of his attention, Kiri's income had taken a serious blow, what with the fact they had lost many jobs and clients due to their abhorrent regime. The rebels, on the other hand, had a few allies in the smaller countries, backing them in hopes that when they won against the loyalists it would put them in good favor when Kiri returned to full power. In the last few months, with the great progress they had made pushing south, they had more time to allocate their forces on missions for money and funding. It also greatly helped that they controlled most of the northern and western ports that connected Mizu no Kuni with the rest of the continent. Naruto watched as the stronger of the prisoners, the ones that had been incarcerated most recently, carried the weaker or younger ones on their backs, the shinobi that had arrived to rescue them doing the same. Naruto would have offered his assistance with sand stretchers, but right now it was taking his full concentration just to keep the guards restrained. Luckily they were being knocked out one by Fu. With each that stopped struggling, Naruto felt his control increase. A small smile couldn't help but play upon his lips as he watched the prisoners get evacuated. If they were in good enough health, the rebels had gained a few more shinobi for the fight. If they weren't, then they had saved many people from an unfavorable fate. Either way they won. The benefit to the rebellion, being mainly bloodline clans, was that every person fighting was a huge benefit. It was sometimes unfair to say, but most often true, that a shinobi with a bloodline was usually worth 3 or 4 regular ninja, as they took less training to be just as useful. The main downside to them was simply they were more limited in what they could learn compared to other ninja. Naruto stayed behind for a few minutes, making sure that nobody in the buildings realized what had happened before the rest had time to get away. They should have timed it so they caught the guards right after a shift change, giving them ample time to get away. However, an error like that could have cost them the entire mission, not to mention all of those prisoners' lives. After 5 minutes, Naruto figured that was enough time, his body quickly vanishing into the surrounding night to rejoin with his comrades. There would be a lot of celebrating back at the camp that night. A single shinobi jogged through dimly lit white corridors, the walls having a small sheen of moisture from the mist hanging in the air outside. His sandal-clad feet made rhythmic thumping sounds against the clean tiled floor. He didn't look left or right, already knowing exactly where he was going. The woman by the door didn't even look up as he passed. He had been there so many times before it had become practically routine. Stopping and straightening up, he caught his breath for a moment. He knew his leader hated it when his shinobi appeared out of breath. It was a sign of weakness. The Mizukage did not tolerate weakness in his ranks. As per procedure, he knocked 3 times on the door, calmly waiting for the call for him to enter. When he heard it, he straightened his uniform before carefully opening the door. His leader had been in a rather bad mood lately, and it wasn't unheard of for messengers to be met with kunai upon entering. Luckily for him, the Mizukage had his back to the door, staring out of the large panoramic window that looked out over Kirigakure. In the waning hours of the day, when the moon had begun its ascent into the sky, the village was often cast into an almost ethereal glow. The moisture clinging to the clean white walls of the cylindrical buildings reflected the pale moonlight which was captured by the mist, creating an almost mystical scene. The streets themselves were completely barren of life, as if the whole village was abandoned. Of course, everybody was simply inside due to the curfew. What is it? The Mizukage didn't bother turning in his chair. There was no need for him to see the people giving him messages. If they had gotten that far into the village, then they were either an exceptional spy or just another of his subordinates. One way they left without hassle, the other, they didn't leave at all. There was a reason he was the Yondai Mizukage. Report from the bloodline holding facility. Mizukage-sama, if the shinobi was a lesser man, he might had stuttered in the presence of such a powerful man that could kill him in the blink of the eye, especially with the information he was giving him. Well then, place it on the desk and leave. The shinobi gave a curt nod, knowing that his leader could see it in the reflection of the window. He cautiously set the manila folder on the large opulent mahogany desk, careful not to disturb the files and papers already neatly stacked there. With that, he gave another quick nod before retreating from the room without another sound. As the door closed, the large swivel chair slowly turned with a creak, revealing the man sat there. He was surprisingly short for one who cast such an intimidating aura, the light grayish hair also contrasting that image. Otherwise the man could have been mistaken for a teenager, although the scald scar running down from his left eye told that he had seen battles. Much of his body was cast into shadow from the moonlight streaming into the room from behind him, but his cold pink eyes were perfectly visible in the shadows his hair cast. Slowly he leafed through the report, his hand slowly tightening into a fist as he read more. Calmly he placed it down and stood from the chair, walking leisurely to the window where he stood, just looking out over his village. To one side a large staff leaned against the wall, on one end what appeared to be a large flower while on the other a curled hook. For a while he simply stared out over the village, his eyes narrowed slightly, before he took a deep breath and closed his eyes. Very well then, I believe I have humored Terumi's little rebellion for long enough. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.